All right, everybody. Some people are still joining, so I'm going to start with the title and introduction. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tess Konnovitch, and I'm the Scientific Marketing Manager here at EarthShift Global. And typically, I am moderating our brown bag webinars, so I'll be introducing the speakers and giving some background. But today, I'm actually presenting, so I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to introduce myself, and then we'll get into my slides. So today I'll be speaking on communicating life cycle assessment, and the goal is to help you make your data, your complex LCA data, clear, visual, and actionable. All right, so a little bit about me, and I like to spend a little bit of time here because I think it's really important so you know what kinds of questions I can answer at the end. So let's get into my background. I got my bachelor's in environmental science and biology from LaSalle University. I dual majored there, and I also had a minor in education. I originally wanted to be a high school science teacher. When I got to my university, I realized that the college professor's schedule and content was more aligned with what I could see myself doing. So I then pursued a PhD in computational biology, where I worked in an ecology lab and continued that environmental science work and research. During my PhD program, I realized I really loved presenting my research results more than I liked actually sitting at the lab and doing the research. And so I eventually left with my master's and got hired at EarthShift Global as a data visualization specialist. So that was my dream role at the time. I got to visualize other people's data um, on a weekly basis. And so it's been really fun. I've recently been promoted to the scientific marketing manager. I've taken on content, some design. I worked on the UI UX of our software, Matter PD. So I've done a lot of that more design work and communicating STEM and specifically life cycle assessment. I've attended a number of conferences, some up to date on Adobe, some data storytelling, Figma, so that UI UX portion I really like to do. And I've had the privilege of speaking at a number of LCA and sustainability focused conferences like ACLCI, the LCA Institute, and ISSST. I also am a course instructor here at EarthShift Global. My course is coming up very soon next month, so feel free to scan the QR code if you want more after this talk. And then I listed a number of skills I have that span from Microsoft Office to Adobe, coding. Today we're going to be talking about those different tools that we can use to visualize and really trying to decide what works for you and your team. So I want to talk about why communicating LCA matters and science in general, why we need to communicate it. And then I want to get into this kind of three-part process where we talk about how to design that take-home message, then the visuals, and then we'll talk about different processes that can help you be more efficient in doing those two things. And then we'll end with a short summary. Okay. So why does communication matter in science and LCA specifically? Because science doesn't create impact on its own. Impact happens when we can pull those scientific insights from the data, making it so that science is understandable and used. So we as scientists, and I still consider myself a scientist, although I've been doing more design work really the last few years, we generate that knowledge, but the people, the decision makers, they act on their understanding and interpretation of that knowledge. And so there's always been this little gap between those two, right? And that's what I really want to focus on today. As scientists, right, we do our research for a number of reasons. Probably number one is to get paid. Number two is probably you have this like deep maybe feeling that this is what you were meant to do in this life, and maybe you really enjoy it too. But I think there's also this fourth component that we want, especially in the sustainability sphere, we want the research we're doing to have impact, maybe change legislation and make an impact on the world. In order to do that, most of us maybe aren't able to make that impact. We are able to do the research, but there's those decision makers that can actually have that impact. And so that's where I feel really called to work on making those decision makers understand. And so the challenge isn't just producing accurate analyses, right? I'm sure you all do that very effectively. It's ensuring the insights are clear enough to guide action. And that's what we'll be focusing on today. So let's talk about communication risks. I have a feeling most of us, if we're in the sustainability world, know about greenwashing. It's the risk that arises when people make really broad claims like this is green or we're sustainable that isn't necessarily backed by data. And greenwashing over time has started to carry some real consequences. There's some regulatory actions, lawsuits, public scrutiny. People like to do their research now. So, luckily, greenwashing is starting to have some consequences. Scientists rarely greenwash, but sometimes we create the opposite problem. So I want to talk a bit about that. There's this different communication risk that arises from us scientists. And so we tend to take this opposite approach where we're dumping all of this data. We emphasize the nuance, we show assumptions, we like to talk about uncertainty. We want to show all of this data. And we're comfortable saying it depends. There's trade-offs. Look at the context, right? Which is good scientific practice. And I will emphasize this a few times in this talk. There is nothing wrong with this. It's very good scientific practice, but it creates a different kind of communication risk, especially for non-scientists. And so when we think about the user, right, if we're looking at it from a design perspective, when we greenwash, the user will either say, oh, great, this product is sustainable, yay, and move on, even if it's wrong. But more and more our users, which are our clients and people buying our products, they're going to be confused. What does sustainable mean? What does green mean? Right? And then when we data dump, we might say something like this, right? Look at all these charts. It's all here. We actually have the same response often from our users where it's just, I don't know what to do with this data. And I linked down here a really great article by Valentina Prado and Gianni Guglielmi from 2020, where they actually talk about the risks of data visualization and communicating LCI. And they talk about inaction, misinterpretation. And so those are some risks. We think about greenwashing and people making the wrong decision, but there's also other risks like inaction, misinterpretation, indecision. So a lot of times when we throw all this data at someone, they might feel a little overwhelmed and intimidated, and then it could result in indecision. And so what I really want to emphasize today is trying to get to that insightful interpretation, right? We can take all that data and you can dump it, maybe in the appendix, but we take all that data and then we, as the scientists who work really closely with this project, we can create this insightful interpretation that maybe less scientific audiences can actually absorb and understand and therefore create action.
Hey Tess,
Yes,
sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. I just wanted to remind everyone to please put your questions in the
yes.
Q&A for after.
Thank you, Laura. I'm
You're
I'm forgetting
welcome.
my moderator role
So sorry
here.
to interrupt.
No, thank you. That was perfect timing. Yes, if anyone has never used the Q&A feature, it's at the bottom. I will be answering all the questions at the end. Oh, thank you, Laura, because I do want to hear from you. So please put your questions in the Q&A. Excellent. Perfect timing, Laura. Okay, so the next thing I do want to say again, because I imagine most of our audience today is scientists, there is nothing wrong with data dumping. There is nothing wrong with detailed data. Don't come for me. I'm not saying that at all. And in fact, we as scientists love it, right? It's fun. We like all the data. And not only that, it's important for ISO standards, transparency, reproducibility, all of the things we really value as scientists. So I do want to emphasize there is nothing wrong with data dumping and detailed data. We need the data. Decision makers need that insight, and they can't always cross that bridge from data to insight. And that's where I think, really, I feel strongly that scientists have a responsibility to help get there. Okay. So we're going to get into designing the message. And I know I have some teammates here. Anytime I look at some data and I'm personally overwhelmed, I will reach out to my teammate and say, okay, what is the message? What is the take home here? What do you want people to take away from your results? I really encourage you to develop your message first. I mean, you're going to do the data, right? But then your message before your visual, before your report, right? And so you're getting this message choosing your format or knowing what format you'll be presenting in is really important because it's going to determine at best the length of what your message is, right? But there's also some pros and cons to each type. So, how many messages can you have? In a report, we can have a ton of key recommendations and conclusions. A poster, you can't have that many, especially visuals. You really can only have a few visuals, and a presentation is different. And so I just want to talk about these different formats and how I kind of think of the design process there when I'm considering my message. Okay, I have some slides. These are more from my course, so they're a little text heavy. I'm just going to go through the main idea of each one. Reports, they're built for documentation. They're designed to document the analysis thoroughly and transparently. Now, I feel strongly that put as much in the appendix as you can. It becomes really chunky and clunky when you're trying to read through. I know because I review LCA reports every day. I literally was just reviewing one 15 minutes ago. You want it to be like a story, even though it's a report, you want people to be able to flow through it. Posters, on the other hand, they're designed for drive-by reading. Make your message clear without you needing to stand there and explain it. Someone should get the key takeaway passing by. And then presentations, you want to tell that story. And I think this slide makes me laugh because I'm not following my own rule, but again, this is more for educational purposes. Think of your slides as a visual cue for the brain, not a written report for the eyes. If they're reading, which you probably all are right now, they're not listening to you. And so thinking about these different formats will help you think about, your message won't really change, but the size and the impact of that message and the scope really could be dictated by these and will be dictated by these different formats. But the design timeline remains the same. And so this is my design timeline when I've done posters and reports, solidifying that main idea, right? We're focusing on the messaging right now. Here we go. I feel strongly, although people may feel differently, about establishing a color scheme early on. If you're at a university or a company, you probably have templates available. Just make those your starting spots. The colors, the charts, the font, the styles, the headings, everything's all already done for you. And the reason I say establish that early, maybe even before number one, but I knew if I put that at number one, people probably wouldn't like it. Do it as early as you can because I can think of myself in grad school. We were collecting data, and then sometimes we had to present like the next day. Don't add, and we're going to talk about your workflow a lot. Don't add this additional step. If you're already working in an Excel, Microsoft, and PowerPoint formatted to your color scheme, branding, university, that takes a step out. You can just drag that figure, it's already formatted, ready to go. So there's other things. If you have your color scheme done early, you know what stock photos you can include. So I really recommend this. And then you can start creating those content chunks. So there's a number of things that have to be included. Your report will have a lot more. This is more like a poster. And then we can arrange those chunks. And this is specifically for a poster. You can decide where each thing goes, right? And it kind of depends on how many visuals, how big the visuals. So you might want to arrange your chunks after you create your visuals. But also, you don't want to create your visuals until you know where everything's going to go because you can kind of decide how big things are. So, and then finally, my favorite stage is that refining and polishing. And this happens at the very end, but I wanted to show kind of my design timeline. And this is the same for reports and PowerPoint. So instead of having, and I actually start everything with a PowerPoint just because I like the layout. Even a report, I'll say, okay, here's first page, here's executive summary, here's what I want to say in each thing. So creating an organized workspace for all of these things, it takes a little bit of time at first, but then it becomes part of your workflow. And then your design timeline is really organized and it's more efficient. The other thing to consider for your message, because we're still not designing your message stage, is your audience, their wants, which I'm going to have listed in green, and then their biases too are important to consider. So we have our LCA practitioners, right? We want clear, accurate, transparent results. We also might be feeling some pressure, right, from those clients. And then we have someone like me, I'm more in the middle, but designers or marketing people, right? They want aesthetic appeal, they want client satisfaction. There's also some biases, right? Aesthetic over accuracy that can arise. And then you have a client. They really want actionable insights and they want to be able to communicate this thing they're paying for, this LCA. They also are really, really tied to their product. And so you have to be careful of some of those biases too. And then there's a number, consumers, marketing, government, the public. The public comes in, and that's where you have to really start to consider not just biases, but limitations. And we should always be considering accessibility and such. But so as LCA practitioners, we love data, we love statistics, we love, a Sankey, a violin plat. I like to see all the data. But when we're thinking about our clients and the public, we don't know what level of math or statistics or level of understanding they're going to have with life cycle assessment in general. And I find this article here really was like a reality check for me a few years ago, and it's something I like to constantly reference. Like most people don't know what the mean, median, mode, uncertainty, standard deviation, those words are nearly meaningless to a lot of people. And so those are words I think we throw around like jargon that might need to be defined depending on who you're presenting to. So now you're thinking about your take-home message. Now let's think about our audience. Who are we presenting to? Because the way we word our take-home message will be dictated by that as well. And maybe we'll want to use some other charts that are like a pictorial or things we know people might know, have a higher likelihood of understanding. I only have one slide on accessibility today. This deserves a ton of slides. In my course, I have a number of ways that you can make your slides visuals accessible. Today, I'm just going to briefly introduce it. And the data visualization and communication in general, if they're not accessible, key insights could be lost. And now the ADA requires digital information is accessible. And there's some resources down here at the bottom that list more like website-based recommendations, but they can be applied to visuals and some communications, some digital communications. But these accessible visualizations ensure that all stakeholders can engage with our information. And like I said earlier, I feel like, having people understand, interact with our work, and then make that impact is really a goal of mine, at least, and I think my organizations. We want to see that change. And so making sure that everybody can engage, it increases the likelihood that we can make that change. And then I really like this quote from the ADA's website that an inaccessible website or data visual can exclude people just as much as steps at an entrance to a physical location. And my one caveat here is I bet there are hundreds of, engineering and building plans for blueprints for accessible staircases. More and more, we're seeing that for the digital world, but it's not as cut and dry. And so, again, I have some resources down here that you can look into. There's a lot of things I do, like color contrast, font size, hierarchy is something I feel really passionate about. I think accessibility, a lot of people just look at colors and they're done, but I think that cognitive overload is another piece that people don't always consider. So I encourage you to design always with accessibility in mind. Okay, so the before you visualize checklist, and then we'll get into visuals. I encourage you to do this before you're visualizing, and it really helps you solidify, am I ready to visualize? What is the core message? What decision or insight should the audience walk away with? What's that nuance? What are the it depends factors? What trade-offs and uncertainties and context is really relevant to people understanding your results? Do you know your audience? Who's interpreting them? What level of detail do they need? What contextual factors or limitations or biases might exist there? What is the format? And how will the audience interact with this information? Are they going to print it? That changes a lot. Is it going to be displayed at a conference on a huge screen? And then setting up that visual system. Do you have an accessible color palette ready to go? Do you have a consistent visual theme or structure? Do you have guardrails or guidelines from your institution that you need to follow? Having all of this will then make everything easier when it's time to visualize. And so now we're going to move on to designing the visuals. We're not going to get into choosing the right chart. I've given a few talks on this, and again, my course covers this, and it just takes a lot of time. So, we kind of go through the different charts that I see a lot in LCA, comparisons, parts to whole. We have trends over time, distributions, and relationships. And there's actually some research that suggests you shouldn't use this radar chart. I should remove it from these slides, but it looks really pretty here. But each of these has pros and cons, right? So it's important to consider those. And again, I have previous webinars where I walk through some of these. So we're going to skip over it today. And I think a lot of you may know the chart you want to use, probably a bar chart if most of you are LCA practitioners, although I encourage you to branch out into some other ones. So now what do you do with those charts? You get your Excel output, something like this. This is really simple. It's not LCA data. We'll get into LCA data soon. You have this Excel output, you have your data, you hit insert chart, and then you get something like this. I want to talk about pre-attentive attributes, which are the visual cues our brains process instantly, which means less mental load for your users or your clients or your audience. I encourage you to put as many as you can on your chart that doesn't clutter it also, so you want to get that balance, but anything that can automatically be understood without you having to explain it is really important. So color, position, size, text font size, but also font like typeface, so italics versus bold versus regular. Um, I like to use Calibri Light sometimes too. So there's a number of different design elements that don't need explaining, but just give that, it kind of gives your audience a vibe. Grouping, which we'll get into. So here's an Excel output. We're looking at sales. Okay, so if I got something like this, immediately I look at numbers all day. It takes me a second to know, is that 4 million? Is it 450,000? There's ways we can get around this. Too many zeros here. Try not to repeat words. It's just clutter or chart junk on your chart. Add an informative subtitle. We have the room here. And okay, what is our takeaway message? If I was presenting this data to my boss, I would want to emphasize that look how much money we made in quarter 4. We're doing great, right? Get that takeaway message, and then you should plaster it like a billboard on your data visual, okay? Here's that same data changed in a way that I can now, I'm almost like manipulating the way people read my chart. If I close my eyes and then look at this, I see grew 25%, 25% green. I immediately get that key message, and then I can go back for context. Oh, fourth quarter, the chart shows, sales here. Oh, wow, 800, like so, revenue in millions, etc. You can, you want to try and control how people are navigating your visual because you're not going to always be there to explain it. Okay, let's try some with LCA data. I already crossed out the title. Let's make it informative. I don't know. Okay, here's something interesting. As you can see, my branding colors at EarthShift Global are green and teal. When it comes to like a direct comparison, like 1v1, I don't like to use green. People associate green with good sometimes, and they also associate blue with good too. Now, once I have to use a ton of colors, green definitely comes in. Green is my heading color. But when you're doing like a 1v1, especially if I were to make this blue bar gray or red or something, people, even though the green here, might be lower or higher, people will automatically like assume it's worse or better, and then they'll have to do some mental work to say, "Oh no, I just misunderstood." So use green sparingly, but I use it all the time because it's in my branding. So it's not a hard rule, it's just something to consider. What else do I want to do here? I want to show you how I prefer to show baselines. I don't do this all the time, but it's how I prefer it. Let's move that legend. There's too much text going on at the bottom. Repeated words, right? And then who knows what's going on the axis. Here's a beautiful, or at least I think so, rendition of this same cluttered data. It looks much nicer. We have this informative title. We have the key message again, plastered at the top. My eyes go there. My eyes also go to this orange box that is the baseline, which is good because my brain is saying, oh, something different is going on here. Back here, you might not have known there was anything really different between the baseline. Here, it's very obvious. And now my products are both blue, so I know they're kind of similar, and it feels okay to compare them, right? We changed the y-axis, we decreased facilities. it just feels cleaner and I feel like I can get the take home immediately, mostly because it's right there. And so this is kind of a report style. If you're in PowerPoint, you can use a tooltip like this. And in fact, I didn't do it today, but I have this little, not parentheses, bracket over this section. You can then use like the transform feature or just a transition to move it over here. So in a report, you don't have as much flexibility at controlling the narrative. In PowerPoint, I can force you to look at things because I can do something like this. So I encourage you to use transitions and animations to direct where your users are looking. And it should pair with your voice. Okay. Let's talk about designing for multiple impact categories. This is something we face a lot in life cycle assessment. I'm often displaying 18 categories at once, and they have similar x-axes. They don't have the same y-axis, so that's important. They have similar legends a lot of the time too. And what can be really overwhelming is in a report having this graph, a paragraph. This graph, right? That's 20 pages now that we're at. Whereas instead, when possible, I like to create what I call dashboards, even though they're not interactive. You could call them data groupings, whatever you want to call them. Grid data grids is probably the most accurate. Here I can still see everything. I'm not comparing them because they all have their own axis, but I know the units. It's really simple. And now that legend is collapsed. It's cleaner. This takes up one page in a report, one slide. And then you can use that little pre-attentive attribute, right? Bopping around to see everything. Now, I think this is really nice, and this happens often when a product maybe follows the same trend across impact categories. And then you can talk about when it doesn't. If every graph is super different, then I would say maybe that warrants you to split them up. But instead of repeating the same thing over and over, we can group them and then put a summary and then list, okay, well, actually, in marine eutrophication, this is different, but otherwise, they follow this trend. Another thing I think is confusing in reports is when we're breaking things down. And in PowerPoint, right? So here's an example. In a report, this could be a page or a graph, a paragraph, flip, a graph, a paragraph. By the time I get to the green and gray one, I don't even know where I am anymore in the breakdown. So instead, I encourage you to use arrows and make it one figure. And sometimes we can't do that. And I wish I had drawn this here, so I'm going to try and give you the visual using words. If you can't fit this all on one page, you could make a little key, and I've done this at the top of your each graph, right? That would say, okay, product, part one, part two, part three, and then that can be pasted on each graph, and you can bold where you are. You want to help ground people in your process, right? And so if this is in a report, you can do a similar thing with PowerPoint. You can say, okay, part one, part two, part three, and we do this often with our clients. Just when you're breaking things down, you really want to help orient them and show them where they are. Here's one I really, really like that we did, and this breakdown was a little complex because we went from, five things to one thing, and then broke down three, and some of those three had two subparts, so it was complex. And over this would have again been seven pages. By the time you get down here, you don't know where you are. And so finding a way to establish hierarchy to help orient people is really important. And again, it makes it accessible. We talked about accessibility and that cognitive overload idea. Help people know where they are. Alrighty, next. You can also help them establish that emphasis and connection with these pre-attentive attributes. I love a transparent rectangle. That's all these are back here. And I grouped them by facility. I wrote product too many times. I wish I hadn't done that, but otherwise, you can just use these little design elements to help establish these connecting items. Okay, this is something I hear a lot and we deal with a lot, this idea of disproportionate data. I feel like we've all been there where we hit insert chart and we can see one thing that has a huge impact and nothing else. And then you want to again think about your take home message. If I look at this chart as is, I'm taking home that only the teal part matters. I'm also thinking that all eight of these parts are the same exact amount. If that's true, then you probably can just leave it like this and maybe add a little note. If that's not true, it's time to get creative, right? So you can do dual axes. I don't really do this often, and if you do, you really need to be clear about which axis is which. You can do axis breaks, which we do here and there. I encourage you to put the value at the top, honestly, of all the bars, but especially that one that breaks the axis, just so people, it's just a reminder, hey, something different is going on here. We don't want them to misinterpret. But if you have the time and ability, I encourage you to get creative. This is my favorite way to display this kind of thing. We see that there's a super impactful part, but we also, and then we can see the relative size of this green part to that super impactful part. But then we can also see that there's differences between these parts. And you can either color these parts differently, or you could even just write what each part is right here. There's room. Um, but this just like, I know exactly what's going on here, which is important. And you can do this, we've all seen pie charts like this. Um, you can use a tree map, right? But let's talk about when it's harder, right? When there's more data and neither of those approaches work. I want to talk about removing invisible data, and the words removing data feel really wrong to have in the same sentence. So let me explain. You insert something like this. This is too much. I don't know what's going on. I can't read anything. It's a lot. Okay, we move on to a sunburst. I don't know what's going on here. Words are not connecting anymore. It's not pretty. Tree maps usually have more space, but still, there's just a lot going on here. So what I would do in a scenario like this is remove anything 2% and below, right? Which again feels a little wrong, but hear me out. And then we can create something like this. And you're not removing data, you're making that invisible data visible. Because now I know in each of these, I can see exactly what's taking up a lot of space. And then I can also read what's also there, but wasn't visible before. I had no idea these words even existed before. And I could try to align them, but it would just clutter your chart. This is really crisp, clear, and again, I don't have to make any guesses or assumptions because all the data is here. The only thing that's not here is the exact value. But really, the exact value isn't here either. You could put it on there, and you could put the exact value in parentheses here if you really wanted to. But this is just so much clearer to me at least. Right? And when you're trying to get creative, here are some tips, right? Strive for simplicity while maintaining nuance and detail. This is simple, but we still have that nuance. We limited colors and patterns. When we go back to those pie charts, all of a sudden we're using different colors and they're kind of starting to look the same and you don't know which is which. And then if someone has a color blindness or color vision impairment, they might all look the same. Now we have separate chunks with lines in between them. You could also border them to make it really clear. And I feel like we avoided cognitive overload here, which was the goal. And lastly, I just want to talk about, I feel like we've talked about designing for non-technical audiences so far. So I want to talk about designing for our more technical audiences. I love the data here with a visual cue. So you can do this right in Excel. You highlight it, you go to conditional formatting, and I can't remember exactly what it's called, but you can fill the cell relatively to whatever you want. So you can either go this way, the whole table. But now I just have that visual cue and I can kind of start comparing. I also added the percentage here. So you can do that and then the total. This is not overwhelming. Even to a non-technical audience, I wouldn't say this graph is overwhelming. It's really clear, simple, color is simple. I think it looks really nice. You can do a heat map as well with that same conditional formatting in Excel, and then you can just copy and paste as a photo or a graph or a table, although sometimes it's too big. So often I'll save it as a photo. I like the cotton candy heat map as well. And then lastly, I would just make sure you have some kind of legend so people know what's what. Especially when it comes, and actually this should be different colors. Especially when it comes to LCA data, high is not good, so I actually should have made it red here, which I think I did. I just messed up the legend. I think it's really important with LCA data, especially when you're doing color to indicate something, to remind people that higher is actually worse in LCA data, right? So I think that's really important. Here's another more technical figure that I just think is fun. We have uncertainty, it's lined up, and we can use that more feature to have fun with it, adding data, etc. This is the last part of the visual. If you can and you have the capacity, you can also add interactivity. I feel like the theme today is really guiding people through your chosen narrative and your message. Interactivity and PowerPoint, you have so much control over what they see. In Excel, you can use slicers and pivot tables. If you like Tableau, you can also do that. But the more feature in PowerPoint, if you have a 3D object, and they have a whole 3D library you can look at, you can actually walk people through the different parts. So now I know exactly where we are. And actually, looking at this, I would have colored these green actually to even more orient the audience. They know exactly what you're talking about because you are showing them. Okay, so now that you've visualized, right, you have this after you visualize checklist. Is the main takeaway immediately clear? It was plastered on some of the graphs we looked at, right? Do the visuals highlight the important patterns and comparisons? Does that title guide your interpretation? And this is important, and we don't always do it. I'm also guilty here. Your slide title could be your key message. Instead of just saying results, it could say product A is this, and that, right? Any text on your slide or figure can help guide interpretation. Did we remove any unnecessary complexity like repeated words, excessive labels? Is the visual readable in that intended format? That's important. And are the color and design choices consistent? That is really important to me. We have clients that we work with hundreds of charts, and I will go through and make sure that if this part is blue, it's blue throughout the report. You want to maintain that consistency and a consistent visual structure. So something I like to do is you're doing a contribution analysis, maybe you do a bar chart this way, stacked bar. And then when we move to a sensitivity analysis, I might switch it to this way, just so again, the user is thinking, oh, something changed. Just things to consider. So those are the two main things I wanted to talk about, the message and then the visuals. Now I want to talk a little bit about how you can design your process to make those two steps easier. I encourage you to make a process built for your team and your audience. Your visualization tools should align with your team workflow and audience. So when I was first hired in this more design level role, I was coming from grad school. I taught myself Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, Lightroom, InDesign in grad school, and I felt really confident with it. And I remember when I started EarthShift Global, I was forcing myself to use it because it just felt like the industry standard. This is what we should be designing in. Over time, I realized it was so inefficient for my team. We have to update visuals, our clients might change data, we might want to change something on the fly. When I was going into Adobe, I created this bottleneck where only I could change something. And similar when I was working in our studio in grad school, not everyone knows that coding language. And so it turned into this bottleneck where only I could update the results. So when you're choosing a workflow, I encourage you to consider who will create and update the visuals. What tools does your team already know? What are they already comfortable with? Will clients need to edit or reuse your outputs? And how often will results need to be updated? The goal is not to use the most advanced tool. I know sometimes I've been to design conferences and they can't believe the things I can do in Microsoft PowerPoint. It's not the most advanced tool for designers, but it is the best tool for my team that enables clear, efficient, and maintainable communication. So let's talk about the three different tools that I personally use, and I just want you to know they're there, they're available. Coding-based visualization, again, objectively, that's probably the best tool. There's so much flexibility, and once you set it up, your figures can be updated with the click of a button. However, if everyone doesn't know a certain coding language, even your clients, also if you're embedding into PowerPoint, coding charts are not linked anymore. And so that's something to consider too. It's an additional step. So sometimes I'll do this, really not as much anymore. In grad school, often I was using the same figure, and every month I had new data. So I just updated the Excel sheet, hit go, and all of my figures updated. But then I did have to take them and put them into my presentations. Adobe, again, objectively a really, really powerful tool. I love Adobe Illustrator, and this visual is from Frederica Fragapane. I took a course with her a year or two ago. So beautiful. You have so much control. You have no constraints. The amount of times I'm in PowerPoint just thinking, oh, if this was in Adobe, I could do this. But Adobe would be a nightmare. It would be a joke if I suggested to my team at our next meeting that moving forward, we only use Adobe for figures. It would just never work. Um, we have reports with 30 plus figures. We have reports with 30 plus dashboards of figures. If we had to design each one in Adobe, we would need 100 of me. So that's just things you could consider when you're trying to um, decide on your tool. Now, if you work for, a government entity or something that's communicating to the public and you only make a high impact visual once a week, once a month, Adobe might be the space for you if you have the time that allows for it. There's minimal design constraints and it allows that full customization. I want to talk about Microsoft Office because this is what I use all day, every day. You get that fast creation and iteration of visuals, easy collaboration across teams and clients, direct editing, no coding experience. So, this actually just happened the other day. I was out of office and a teammate had emailed me, oh, this one thing needs to be updated. And I was able to, from my cell phone, send the PowerPoint and just say, just go ahead and edit the text right here and you're good. And then there was no bottleneck. She was able to update it, able to put it back in the report, easy. And I encourage you all to install Brightslide. It brings a lot, and I'm going to show you a few. I think we have time for a little video. Um, it brings a lot of Adobe features into PowerPoint, so it really becomes powerful. And the linked data and templates, I just can't do without. The fact that if a client changes their data, everything's automatic. I can hit apply template and all of my charts look the same. It's easy for teams and clients to generate, update, and reuse, and it's what works for me. But like I said, I just showed you three different avenues, and this might not work best for you. I encourage you also to use raw graphs. It's a free tool online. You can write down the link. I haven't had to go to our studio because raw graphs has everything I need if I am getting a little funky with a chart. And then you can download it as an SVG, right? And I don't know if you know this, you can insert an SVG into PowerPoint, right click, click on group, and then all of these lines and circles just become shapes. And now you can edit the color, you can edit everything. So I love raw graphs. I think it seamlessly goes into Adobe, it seamlessly goes into PowerPoint, and for me, it's really taken away my need to go into RStudio or Python. I want to talk about Brightslide a bit. We're going to fly through this little video. You can cut, first off, just Microsoft in general. I just inserted two icons. You can convert them to shapes, and now they're just regular shapes. And now you can go to shape format, and you can do a number of things. One is editing points. This is something I used to go to Adobe for that you actually can do right in PowerPoint. I'm making these sunglasses have a little cat eye. They look great. The other thing you can do is, let's see, you can ungroup, convert to shape, ungroup, and I can move around these bubbles and have fun with it. So you can really customize icons that, again, I went to Adobe Illustrator before for. You can go into Bright Slide and you can align things. You can match size, right? So all these scientists are different. I'm going to match the size. Yay. Now I can align them and now I can distribute them. Just tools that I used to sit there and drag things that make my life easier. The other thing I want to share in this pane is your selection pane. I really encourage you to have this open because you can see every single object that's on your page. You can click on them, you can layer them and such. This has been really helpful for me. And then if you're not using grid lines, I encourage you to put them on. I have them for every title just to make sure everything's aligned, and I just love my grid lines. You just right click and do grid lines. Now you may be wondering, icons can be really helpful on charts. This is a chart talk, right? This is data visualization. Microsoft treats charts just like objects. So everything I just showed you, you can actually do with charts too. And another thing you can do is you can create a template. Voila, you can create a template and you can make your charts automatically reformat into the design that you want. This is critical for my dashboards. I can make a dashboard in maybe 2 minutes if I was gonna win a prize, right? I can click all of them and make them the right format. I can match size, I can align them, and I can distribute them, and you can even put them in a grid, right? And now I have a dashboard. This has completely changed, at least for me, my ability to quickly generate these dashboards that we're making all the time. The templates I really, really enjoy. And any chart you have, you can turn into a template just by going to where I showed you earlier and clicking Save as Template. So I love Microsoft Office. I hate it some days too, but it's really powerful. Great. Okay, we're going to have time for questions, which is what I really wanted. Key takeaways, clear communication starts before visualization, and that's why I really started with the message today. Know your message, know your audience, know your format, know your trade-offs, know what's important, okay? Avoid both extremes. I don't think anyone here is going to go the greenwashing route, but also the data dumping route. Take that time, if you have it, to really think about what insights do you want to share, because a lot of times, especially if they're clients, they might be relying on you and your scientific knowledge and scientific brain to help them understand. Design your visuals to reveal patterns. I think sometimes I saw this a lot in grad school too. It was like, all right, here's the visual done, with no intentional thought on what do I want people to see. Use pre-attentive attributes and design elements to guide interpretation, write your title, your structure, context, help your audiences understand what matters, and then make it efficient because then you're more likely to do it. I used to have a when I had to make dashboards, I'd be like, all right, set aside this chunk of time. It was a little bit of a hassle. Now it is so seamless. I am happy to make dashboards whenever my team needs them. I've created this workflow that's just really efficient for me. All of my slides are in the right template. I never open a blank PowerPoint. I just open a template because everything's already the way I need it. It takes out that step, it takes out that annoyance, and I am more likely to do it because it's efficient. Here, if you want to take a quick photo, here are some recommended readings. Some of them I'm still reading through. I have my bookshelf up here. If you're going to read anything from this list, I encourage you to read Gianni Guglielmi and my guidance document. It is from a few years ago, but we combined our experience, Gianni's grad school research, and we also surveyed LCA practitioners talking about ways to visualize life cycle assessment. I do hope to update it sometime in the next maybe year or two, but it's there, and I think it's still a really valuable community resource. And with that, I'm going to leave this slide up. You can look at my training. If this wasn't enough for you, feel free to come and join and sign up. And I have my email on here too. Please feel free to email me any questions. But now I'm going to open up the Q&A. I see we have a few. And please, as I'm answering questions, feel free to ask more, okay? Okay. The first question is, are there any special considerations when presenting data and analyses to politicians? Absolutely. So this is not something I have a ton of experience in, although we have worked with government entities and such. I would say language is really important here. I also may go out on a limb and say the less sciencey jargon and less complex visuals, the better. I'm sure some politicians are interested in science. I'm going to say not all of them. And so their familiarity with scientific reports and scientific visuals, you just don't know. And I think that's a really good question. And it brings up a great point because if you don't know, like there's some clients that we have worked with, quite a few clients we've worked with repeatedly. We know what they want now. We know the level of understanding they have, and they've learned a lot from us. So we know we can be a little more jargony. Um, if you don't know, simpler is better. I forget the statistic. Most of America is at some reading level, some elementary or middle school reading level. If you don't know your audience, you can run things through like AI or online. So you can say like, do I have any jargon here? Is this at a fifth grade reading level? When it comes to politicians, I hope none are here. I'm not trying to say they can't understand it, but I would say you can't make the assumption that they all understand scientific data. Okay, the next question is, are the graphs you're presenting all created with Excel, or do you utilize other programs? And I know this was answered, or this was asked a little earlier. So I think it was asked before I brought up raw graphs. I would say 90, if we're considering all the graphs I've ever visualized in the last 4 years, 99% of them are in Excel. It's just what works for my team. And then, we paste it in PowerPoint. And that's the other thing. When you go in code-based or raw graphs or Adobe, you have to export, upload, make sure it's high quality, and then if something changes, you need to delete, edit, export, and even like delete, launch Adobe, edit, export, insert. So we're linking charts from Excel. It's literally just a copy paste. It's high quality. Most of the charts you just saw in the beginning, especially, all of them are Excel. If I add like the baseline that you saw earlier, I literally draw a shape in PowerPoint and hit send to back, or I use that selection pane and align things. So that's not even part of the chart. I just lined it up. So I'm doing most of my design work right in PowerPoint. And again, it's nice because if I'm on vacation or I'm out of office or if we need to do something on the fly, it's just a box. My analysts can go in and change the color of the box or delete the box if it's not what the client wants, right? The other one that I will use is raw graphs. Sankey diagrams are the main thing I'll go to raw. It's just so easy. You just copy and paste your data and you can anonymize it, right? You can make it, so it is a secure site, but I still will change a lot of the column names and headers and such. But you just paste your data and then you can see, and actually can I go back? Let's go look at raw graphs together because I feel like I'm thinking of it, but I want you all to see it, right? So you can paste your data right here, and you have all of these things to pick from. And it makes suggestions based on what your data is, and then you just drag your variables from your spreadsheet, and there it is. And you can change the color in here. What I find again is you save as an SVG. You right click, ungroup, and you might have to ungroup a few times, but then you can change the color right in PowerPoint. So it just becomes a shape when you do that. It becomes a shape in PowerPoint. So that's how I do most of my work. And thank you for, there's a reference in here, communicating effectively in color. I'm going to copy that. And coloring in R is blind spot. These are awesome references. Thank you. I'm going to add them. And I can't wait to review them. And let's see if I can put these in the chat. I'm gonna paste them. I'm not sure if all of you can see the questions, but um, an audience member shared these links. So I look forward to reviewing them, and now you have them as well. And actually, what I might do while we're talking is keep my recommended readings up, so maybe you guys can take them. Okay, let me answer these. The next question, and let's see. Good, we're doing good on time. You mentioned a data viz course you have, as well as another course you took by Frederica Fragapane. Could you share more info? Absolutely. So now I'm going to go back. Here is the QR code. And if you just search Frederica Fragapane data visualization course, I think she has multiple, and it's not on the typical platforms. I don't think it's Coursera or Thinkific or those. She is, I can't remember. She's somewhere in Europe, so but it's in English. Yeah, so search Frederica Fragapane. Here's my email. Email me if you can't find it, and then I will get back to you. So thank you, Patrick. Okay, the next question. Is there a regulation guidance you refer to for accessible graphs? That's a great question. That's something I'm actually going to make a note because back when we developed the guidance document and when I developed my course, there really wasn't, let me fly. all the way to the very beginning of my presentation because I did list a few places that I personally reference. Um, my arrows went away. There they are. Boop, boop. Please hold. This is what happens when you use animations. I guess I could have exited, but here we are. Okay. The WCAG, ADA, these are a number of resources that I reference. But I would love a regulation guidance. So if anyone knows of one or is in a position to push to create one, as far as I know, and that's why I kind of bring up their quote about the staircase, there are regulations about physical things, but the digital space is a little less, at least again, when I developed these materials a few months ago, maybe it was when I updated them. I don't have anything specific besides the resources I listed at the bottom. So that is what I reference often. Okay, another question. Any success stories where a client initially misunderstood results, but changes in the visuals dashboards help them make better decisions? That's a great question. The one part, which is I love my schedule. I get to meet with my team, but I'm more of an introvert definitely when it comes to work. So a lot of my work is quiet with headphones and design. So when I create something, I give it to my analysts, and I actually don't often interact with clients. I do here and there. So I can't answer this question, but I'm gonna go out on a limb. I know I receive really positive feedback. People love the dashboards. Better decisions, I can't really attest to, but I know the experience is often better when they're not flipping through a ton of pages and the insights just jump out at them. So yeah, that's a great question that I should ask my team about. It's always nice to get positive feedback. So thank you. Could you also please speak a bit on how you create dashboards on Microsoft Office, or is that a separate training? I can speak a bit on it. I'm actually going to hit escape. I'm going to continue to share. And I'm gonna hide my notes because I need help sometimes. Um, I don't have the time to show you all of it. We have 2 minutes. My training does cover this, but I do want to just show you what they look like behind the scenes. So these are literally just all individual graphs. They're all still linked, which is awesome. So we had this one beast of a report had 30 plus dashboards and the client changed the data, and then I can literally just click this, and right now it's a grouped item because the title is grouped, but you can just go to chart, right, and you can hit refresh data and then it updates. So all of these are linked. This legend is a photo, so I saved the legend in the order that I liked it and then pasted it at the bottom, and I just removed the legend from all of this. You could also draw. Sometimes I've drawn a legend with boxes and text boxes. So there's some things that you do have to customize. But yeah, all of these are just linked charts. These are just text boxes. Actually, this is a table. Ah, I'm pretty sure I used a table sometimes for. So it's all things I have a feeling you guys know how to use. And it's just being a little creative with it. But yes, if you want a training on creating these linked dashboards, feel free to sign up for my course, and I'll go back to that QR code. Then we have 3 more questions. So I'll say a few minutes after. I'm sure some of you might have to jump. So thank you for being here. I'm going to answer these next. I think the last one's actually references. So the next question is, are there any recommendations on how to best represent data in annexes or appendixes with respect to aggregation? I strongly feel anything you can put in the appendix. Um, and if you can, make the appendix a supplemental document. My dream report is a 30-page LCA, concise text, executive summary, maybe a dashboard, um, maybe a table, something simple, insights, 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 and then a supplemental 300-page document with all of the stuff ISO ones, or a supplemental, the appendix. When people open up a PDF and it says 300 pages, a lot of people might just close it. That's why we have white papers, right? That's why people like to make separate documents for marketing. Um, that would be my recommendation. But it really, I think my main recommendation is I should be able to read this like a story. I shouldn't have to flip to the appendix. It should be like a story. So if I need that context to get through this story, put it in the report. If the context is like oh, and if you're interested for more, put it in the appendix. That's how I try to think about it. But it doesn't always happen, right? We have huge reports, and that's just how it is. And I am going to answer that one. And actually, the last bit, thank you for this. There is an upcoming webinar, it looks like. I'm actually going to paste it because I think I'll attend it. Building accessible charts for those with color blindness. I'm going to paste these in the chat as well for everyone. Thank you, Sanford. This is great. Okay. So now we have a ton of resources. We have my QR code here. We have my email here. Those are all of the questions we have for today, and we are 1 minute over, so I think it's perfect timing. I'm going to close out, and again, thank you so much for joining. Next month, we have a really exciting topic we're going to post soon. Hang on, there's one more. No, oh, here's one more link I will share with all of you. Do-do-do. Okay, so now you have a ton of resources. You have my email. You have some recommended readings. I just want to thank you all for joining and being so engaged today. I had a ton of fun presenting. And again, hopefully, I'll see some of you at my course next month. So it's in 2 weeks where we'll dive into a lot of this. You can send me your visuals ahead of time and we can play around with them. But until next time, again, we'll have a webinar focused on food and agriculture in LCA in April, in late April. So I hope to see you there. Sign up for our newsletter if you haven't yet, and we'll be in touch. So I hope everyone has a great Thursday.